The drop punt is the most common kick used during a game of AFL football to pass the ball and score goals. Using a one-dimensional skill classification system, the drop punt is a gross motor skill, discrete motor skill, and closed motor skill. According to Gentile's two-dimensional taxonomy, the drop punt is classified as a 4D skill. It requires body transport and object manipulation. Also, the skill is performed whilst in motion and there is inter-trial variability. Drop punt is broken down into 5 key teaching points: the grip, walk, run up, ball drop, ball contact, and follow through.
So for the grip of the ball, you want the stitches facing towards the target. You want your pinky fingers down the seam of the ball there. So to walk into goal, you want to be facing your target, making sure your hips and shoulders are lined up with the ball, walking straight towards the goal, nice and balanced with your head over the ball. So for ball drop, you want to make sure it's nice and low, and make sure you're guiding it down, not grabbing it, and making sure as well you can practice just dropping it, make sure it bounces straight up and straight back to you as well. So for ball contact, you want to be kicking the bottom third of the ball to get that backward spinning motion. Alright, what you want to do, make sure that, remember all those other points and kick it through. So for the last bit, the follow through, what you want to do is focus on not just poking at the ball, but kicking through the ball.
To measure performance of this skill, 2 types of tests are used: qualitative and quantitative. For the qualitative test, a score out of 5 is given for each teaching point, giving the learner an overall score out of 25. For the quantitative test, the learner will have 3 stations, each 20 metres away from the goals, but on different angles. One directly in front, one on a 45-degree angle to the left, and the other on a 45-degree angle to the right. The learner has 3 attempts at each station, where they must try and score a goal. Points will be added together, giving an overall score: 6 points for a goal and 1 point for a behind. These performance measures are used for a pre-test before training begins and a post-test after the completion of training. A retention test using the same measures is completed 3 to 4 days after the post-test with no coaching to determine the extent to which the learner retained information and mastered the skill. A transfer test is also completed a week after completion of training, using the same measures but changing the conditions. This includes completing the skill in a game situation with added pressures, including defenders and crowd. 3 stages of learning include the cognitive, associative, and autonomous stages. Stage 1, the cognitive stage, involves understanding the nature of the motor skill from observation, verbal feedback from the coach, and the learner's own sensory feedback. There are numerous gross errors during this stage as the learner is discovering both kinematic and kinetic properties of the skill. Stage 2, the associative stage, involves understanding how the various components of the skill are interrelated. Here the learner modifies and adapts the movement pattern according to the situation. Stage 3, the autonomous stage, is where the movement execution becomes more automatic and attention can be directed elsewhere. There are less errors during performance in this stage. For this skill, it is expected the learner would reach the associative stage within the 6 weeks. It is difficult to reach automatic movement execution within 6 weeks, making little errors.
The transfer of learning is the influence of previous experiences on performing a new skill. A positive transfer occurs when the learner has previous experiences that will facilitate the performance of the new skill. Negative transfer occurs when the learner's previous experiences interfere with the performance of the new skill. Augmented feedback usually comes from an external source. This feedback adds information that the person cannot detect using his or her sensory system. Augmented feedback usually includes knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Knowledge of results is external verbal information about the outcome of performance or attainment of a goal. Knowledge of performance refers to information about actual movement patterns and the characteristics that led to performance and outcome. When a learner receives augmented feedback on every trial, the learner is believed to engage in a different type of learning process compared to not receiving feedback after every trial. This is known as the guidance hypothesis. This is thought to guide the learner to perform the movement correctly, although this can have a negative effect. Modelling includes the use of demonstration as a way of teaching the information on how to perform a skill. Verbal instructions are also used to teach the skill. Verbal cues in particular must be accurate and brief. They should focus on key elements, draw attention to necessary information, be concise, and have a strong cognitive representation. Example of verbal cues for when teaching the AFL drop punt include guide the ball, don't grab it, point your toe, head over the ball, and kick through the ball. The learner must experience a variation in movement and context characteristics while training. This is known as practice variability. Ways to practice contexts include changing regulatory characteristics and non-regulatory characteristics. Regulatory characteristics directly influence the pattern of movement. Examples include the score, noise, and pressure. Non-regulatory characteristics. These do not directly affect the pattern of movement, but may influence the degree of success. Practice distribution. When scheduling practice, the length and frequency of the practice session and the length of the rest intervals between trials during each practice session must be considered. Two types of practice distribution scheduling are massed practice sessions. These are longer and fewer sessions per week with none to very short rests. Distributed practice sessions. These are shorter and more frequent sessions with longer rest intervals. Contextual interference effect refers to interfering with contextual or cognitive information from one trial to the next. For beginners learning a closed skill, including the AFL drop punt, practice must be blocked and have low interference. As the learner progresses, practice becomes more random with higher interference. Whole practice is referred to practicing the skill in its entirety and is used when the skill is low in complexity and high in organisation. Part practice, on the other hand, is used when the skill is high in complexity and low in organisation, breaking down the skill into key parts. Both part and whole practice was implemented to teach this skill throughout the training program. During the first 2 weeks, part practice was used, focusing on body position and ball grip before the whole skill was attempted. The learner should complete sessions 3 to 4 times per week rather than one long session each week. Motivation is used to engage the learner and encourage them to perform the skill well. It includes intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation comes from outside the learner. Intrinsic motivation comes from within the learner, where they must work hard to acquire and refine their motor skills.
The 3 types of memory include sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is where information is held for about 1 second. Short-term memory is your working memory, where information is taken from sensory memory via selective attention process, or information is retrieved from long-term memory via retrieval process. Information is held here for less than 30 seconds. Long-term memory is where information from short-term memory is abstracted for storage. Attention refers to several characteristics associated with perceptual, cognitive, and motor activities that establish links to our performance of motor skills.